Nietzsche never spoke to please, but to wound certainties. When he touches upon the subject of woman, his pen becomes even sharper, more uncomfortable, almost cruel. But did he hate women, as many believe? Or did he see in them a brutal mirror of life's forces, more instinctive, more sincere, more cruel than masculine morality dared to admit? The philosopher did not view the feminine as inferior, but as dangerous. Raw nature, power disguised as fragility, cunning beneath the veil of delicacy. The discomfort arises because, in revealing this essence, he also denounces the falseness of romantic idealizations and the illusions of equality that appease weak spirits. What if what we call feminine love were nothing more than a refined form of power? What if tenderness actually concealed the will to dominate? These questions pierce through Nietzsche's work like silent daggers. And it's no coincidence that many preferred to accuse him of misogyny rather than face his deeper provocation. If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey, for what lies ahead is not comfort, but upheaval. For Nietzsche, the feminine was never a clear surface, a simple object of understanding. Woman, in his writings, appears as enigma, as something that cannot be reduced by science, morality, or attempts at romantic domestication. He said that woman is not transparent, but a problem. This vision doesn't spring from contempt, but from an observation. Feminine essence doesn't reveal itself easily. On the contrary, it hides, plays, disguises, maintains itself in constant movement, always escaping direct observation. And it's precisely this that awakens both fascination and fear. For what cannot be deciphered generates insecurity. Man, accustomed to dominating and naming things, encounters something that insists on remaining obscure. And this feminine obscurity, far from being weakness, is power. Woman, by not surrendering herself entirely to masculine discourse, guards within herself a force that challenges certainty, that shakes order. Nietzsche saw in this mystery a kind of hidden vitality. While man frequently binds himself to rules, to the weight of tradition, to the search for clarity, woman preserves within herself a more intimate connection with life in its raw form. She doesn't need to justify her impulses. She lives them. This proximity to instinct makes her more dangerous and, at the same time, more authentic. A simple example can be seen in everyday relationships. How many times does a man believe he's conducting the relationship, making decisions, imposing his path, and yet he's guided in subtle, invisible ways by feminine choices as silent as they are calculated? This isn't trivial manipulation, but a way of being that transforms vulnerability into advantage. The feminine mystery functions as defense, but also as a form of attack. This duplicity disturbs. Man seeks direct answers, wants to know what woman really thinks. But woman, for Nietzsche, cannot be reduced to this really. Her truth is fluid. Her essence is movement. The attempt to define her would be similar to trying to catch water with bare hands. The more force applied, the more it escapes. And here, the danger emerges. What cannot be controlled, what cannot be entirely understood, threatens. Nietzsche saw woman as an untamable vital force, a piece of nature that never allows itself to be completely civilized. It's at this point that so many take offense at his vision, confusing it with contempt. But the provocation is different. The feminine doesn't fit into fragile idealizations. Those who seek only the sweet and pure image of woman are frightened when they encounter her tragic and instinctive dimension. The feminine mystery, therefore, isn't something to be undone, but something to be respected. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to decipher woman, but to recognize in her the presence of forces more ancient and more intense than social conventions. Her presence disturbs because it reminds man that he isn't the absolute master of life. There's always something that escapes his control. Deep down, what Nietzsche calls danger is nothing but the reminder that life is greater than any attempt to imprison it in concepts. Woman, for him, embodies this lesson. Life is mask, is disguised depth, is force that hides under delicate forms. And precisely because of this, approaching the feminine is like approaching an abyss. There's fascination, there's beauty, but there's also vertigo. Perhaps that's why Nietzsche provokes so much discomfort when he speaks of woman. He doesn't offer easy answers, doesn't create an idealized portrait, doesn't leave us comfortable. He places us before the unknown and asks us, are you prepared to face what never reveals itself entirely? Do you have the courage to love what is mystery and not promise of security? This is the first wound that Nietzsche opens. Woman is not what man desires her to be, but what escapes, what challenges, what remains secret. And it's precisely in this secret that her power resides. Nietzsche never treated love as an innocent experience. For him, love isn't a pure union of souls, but a field of forces, a game of power disguised as tenderness. And in this field, woman plays a peculiar role. What many men believe to be feminine surrender, the philosopher sees as strategy, as a form of silent domination. There's no hatred in this vision, but the uncomfortable realization that love is rarely innocent. What's at stake, according to Nietzsche, isn't just affection, but will to power. Each gesture of care, each word of sweetness, each feminine silence can carry an undeclared intention, to influence, to guide, to shape the other without him noticing. Man, in his vanity, imagines himself master of the relationship, but is frequently conducted invisibly by woman's strategic intelligence. This game can be seen in small, everyday situations. Think of a couple discussing a travel destination. Man believes he decides rationally, comparing prices, evaluating options, but doesn't perceive that the final choice was already subtly directed from the beginning by apparently innocent feminine comments. And I think it's cozier there, or the food there seems better, doesn't sound like imposition, but gradually shifts the decision toward what she had already desired. In the end, man leaves satisfied, believing the choice was his. This is the invisible game. Nietzsche didn't see this as vulgar manipulation, but as expression of life's very nature. Life, he said, is will to power. Everything that lives desires to grow, expand, affirm itself. Woman, closer to instinct, manifests this force naturally. Love, in this sense, isn't the suspension of the struggle for power, but its refinement. The affective field becomes the place where domination happens subtly, elegantly, almost imperceptibly. And here emerges the deconstruction. Our culture, from early on, romanticizes love, placing it on the pedestal of purity, equality, disinterested surrender. Nietzsche, however, removes the veil from this ideal and shows us what lies beneath: competition, dominion, game of forces. Love is theatre, but vital theatre without which we couldn't move. Woman on this stage isn't spectator, but leading actress. This doesn't mean Nietzsche condemned love. On the contrary, he saw it as an essential part of life, an experience that sweeps us away and transforms us. But he warned, don't be fooled by the appearance of innocence. Love is struggle, and in struggle there are no innocents. To love, for him, is also to accept the risk of being conducted, of being used, of being defeated in a game whose board is never clear. Let's think of unrequited love, for example. Man who despairs before feminine indifference believes he suffers because he lost something pure, but actually what he lost was power over the situation. His pain springs from impotence, from the fact of not being able to move her heart in his direction. Amorous suffering is ultimately a suffering of power. One doesn't suffer only because one loves, but because one doesn't dominate. Nietzsche knew this theme would sound cruel. By speaking of love as power, he destroys the comfortable illusion that loving is always giving oneself. but at the same time, he offers deeper understanding. To love is also to be defeated, is to expose oneself to the risk of losing one's own sovereignty. Man who believes he loves a pure and disinterested woman is merely dreaming. The real woman for Nietzsche loves with instinct, and instinct is force, is appropriation, is game. And isn't this precisely what makes love so intense? If love were only harmony, only sweetness, it would be fragile, boring, incapable of moving us. What binds us to love is precisely the tension between surrender and dominion, between fragility and power, between illusion and strategy. Woman embodies this tension more visibly because her presence is already in itself an invitation to the game. She doesn't need to declare war. It's enough to exist, and the field of forces is already open. Nietzsche invites us, therefore, to abandon naivety. Instead of seeking in love the promise of security, we need to see it as it is, a risk, a danger, a veiled duel. And paradoxically, it's precisely this that makes it beautiful. Love as power doesn't diminish its grandeur. On the contrary, it intensifies it. What would human desire be without this silent dispute? What would life be without the feminine mystery that transforms affection into battlefield? The philosopher, in exposing this uncomfortable truth, doesn't intend to destroy love, but to free it from false idealizations. To love is to accept that there's no neutrality, that there's always a game. And perhaps maturity in love consists in recognizing this game and still choosing to remain in it. Not as victim, but as conscious player, capable of losing without resentment and winning without illusions. In the end, Nietzsche leaves us before a disturbing question. Do you love because you desire to be free, or because you desire to be defeated? And if love is inevitably a game of power, who really conducts your story? Nietzsche believed that Christian morality had weakened man. The morality of the herd, as he called it, was built to domesticate the strong, to contain instincts, to transform life into obedience and submission. But when he looked at woman, the philosopher perceived something different, a deeper resistance to this domestication. While man became prisoner of rules, woman, in many aspects, remained closer to her instincts. This perception wasn't romantic praise, but brutal analysis. For Nietzsche, woman was never entirely moralized. Even though she had to adapt to roles imposed by society, she conserved within herself a connection with the body, with desire, with the natural cunning of life. Morality could discipline man, make him carry guilt, submit to abstract ideals of purity or sanctity. Woman, however, even when speaking the language of morality, kept behind it the living presence of instinct. That's why Nietzsche saw in women something dangerous to the established order. The morality of the herd demands predictability, control, obedience. But the feminine, with its enigmatic vitality, escapes these bonds. The example lies in small gestures of common life. How many times does a woman, faced with rigid rules, find subtle ways to circumvent them, reinterpret them, or subvert them to her own benefit? This capacity to move among the bars of morality shows that deep down she was never completely domesticated. Man, on the other hand, tends to become slave to the very rules he creates. He makes laws, erects systems, imposes codes, and soon becomes their prisoner. Nietzsche saw in woman a survival instinct that kept her less dependent on these artificial constructions. Perhaps that's why so many men sought to control her with even greater force, fearing precisely her hidden freedom. But there's something even deeper. The morality of the herd, by weakening instincts, distances human beings from life itself. Woman, in her more direct relationship with instinct, represents a threat to this weakening. She reminds man that life isn't just rationality and discipline, but also desire, cunning, conquest. In other words, while man allows himself to be imprisoned by the bars of morality, woman continues to be, in some measure, Dionysiac. Nietzsche recognized that society demanded from woman a role of obedience. She was expected to show submission, silence, purity. But what he perceived was that, even in this role, woman never stopped exercising power. Her apparent docility was just a mask that hid strategies of survival and domination. While men prided themselves on being the owners of reason, women continued to pull the invisible strings of life. A clear example is the relationship between mother and child. Christian morality always exalted the maternal figure as symbol of sacrifice, purity, and dedication. Nietzsche, however, could see there something more intense: woman's power to silently mold a human being's mind, to transmit values, to educate desires. Man may write treatises and laws, but it's often through feminine influence that someone's inner life is marked. This feminine resistance to total moralization isn't just social, but also metaphysical. For Nietzsche, woman is closer to earth, more connected to the body, to flesh, to instinct. She's less attracted to abstract ideals and more attentive to life's concrete forces. This makes her an uncomfortable reminder of everything Christianity tried to deny. Woman, in this sense, is almost a living heresy against the morality of the herd. However, this observation also carries tension. If woman resists domestication more than man, she also carries with her the risk of being seen as constant threat. From this springs many of the historical attempts to repress her, control her, confine her. The danger Nietzsche saw wasn't in supposed feminine inferiority, but precisely in her untamable vital force, which doesn't bow easily to norms. What frightens deep down is that this feminine vitality calls into question morality's fragility. It shows that life continues pulsating beneath rules, that instincts don't disappear, that domestication is never total. Woman, for Nietzsche, isn't just mystery, but constant reminder that life cannot be reduced to commandments. And here emerges the most uncomfortable provocation. If the morality of the herd intends to weaken the strong, perhaps woman, by resisting this domestication, preserves within herself something nobler, something that modern man lost. Perhaps precisely by carrying this secret connection with instinct, she's closer to what Nietzsche called affirmation of life. Thus, the feminine, instead of being merely object of morality, becomes the mirror of its insufficiency. Woman, even when she seems to obey, guards within herself a subterranean force that threatens the entire system. And that's why Nietzsche describes her not as victim, but as danger. She doesn't destroy morality through explicit revolts, but through the simple persistence of her untamable vitality. Looking at woman, Nietzsche invites us to reflect. What still exists in us that's instinctive, vital, undomesticated? And to what extent have we, men and women, already been imprisoned by the herd? Perhaps by recognizing this feminine resistance, we can also recover in ourselves the courage to live closer to life, without so much guilt, without so much fear, without so much obedience. Nietzsche perceived in woman a rare capacity, the art of performance. Not as vulgar falseness, but as form of survival and power. The mask, for him, isn't a sign of weakness, but of vital intelligence. While man usually seeks transparency, clarity, definition, woman preserves secrecy, ambiguity, the game. Her strength isn't in saying everything she thinks, but in suggesting, in hiding, in manipulating the other's gaze. The feminine mask, in this sense, is almost a weapon. It allows woman to transit between different roles, adapt to external demands, and at the same time protect her interior essence. Man who demands total sincerity doesn't understand that in life raw truth is unbearable. Woman, with her theatrical ability, reminds us that existence is made of appearances, and that knowing how to manage these appearances is a sign of wisdom. Nietzsche even suggests that woman is by nature more artist than man. Not because she paints pictures or writes poems, but because she transforms life itself into performance. Her way of speaking, of dressing, of moving, of smiling, everything can be game, representation, calculation. And isn't this exactly what makes her fascinating? Woman knows that seduction isn't brute force, but refined theatre in which the other believes himself protagonist, when actually he's already been ensnared in the role she assigned him. This theatre shouldn't be read as lie. Nietzsche despised the idea of absolute naked objective truth. For him, all life is interpretation, and the mask is only the most honest way of recognizing this. Woman, by cultivating her art of disguising and performing, only reveals more evidently what we all do, even though man insists on deluding himself with his own authenticity. In daily life, this shows itself clearly. Think of a marital argument. Man gets irritated, raises his voice, exposes his anger directly. Woman often responds with silence, with a calculated look, with an expression of apparent calm. This silence, far from being submission, is a mask that disarms, that inverts the game, that transforms the other's fury into impotence. Feminine theatre works precisely there. It's not frontal resistance, but strategic displacement. Nietzsche admired this capacity because he saw in it a reflection of life itself. Life, he said, doesn't show its truths immediately. It always hides, always disguises itself, always creates veils and illusions to continue existing. Woman, in this sense, is a microcosm of this vital logic. She doesn't surrender entirely, always conserves something hidden, always performs. This art of the mask, however, is also what most disturbs man. He desires clarity, demands answers, seeks woman's truth. But woman's truth for Nietzsche is that there's no single truth, only masks upon masks. This feminine theatre isn't defect, it's potency. And the discomfort it provokes is only the reflection of masculine incapacity to deal with life's fluidity. Deep down, Nietzsche launches us a provocation. Wouldn't this feminine theatricality be a superior form of wisdom? Wouldn't the mask, instead of deception, be a revelation that life can only be endured as art? To love a woman in this sense is to accept not possession of truth, but participation in the infinite game of appearances. Nietzsche saw in the relationship between man and woman an inevitable clash of forces, a conflict that isn't resolved by harmony, but by permanent tension. On one side, man tries to elevate woman to an abstract ideal, the perfect wife, the pure mother, the untouchable muse, the angel of the house. On the other side, the real woman, with her instincts, with her cunning, with her dangerous vitality, resists this framing. It's in this friction that the drama between the eternal feminine and the masculine ideal is born. The eternal feminine, expression inherited from tradition, was often romanticized as redemptive force, as spiritual purity. Nietzsche, however, deconstructs this vision. For him, the feminine isn't salvation, but vital potency, and precisely because of this, it's ambiguous, instinctive, even cruel. The masculine ideal, by trying to imprison woman in angelic images, seeks to neutralize this potency, transform it into something harmless, predictable, domesticated, but life doesn't allow itself to be domesticated. Woman who appears absolutely pure often carries behind the veil the brute force of desire, of strategy, of will to power. This isn't about accusing falseness, but recognizing that feminine reality is more complex than the masculine ideal can bear to admit. When man demands from woman only docility, he creates not a human being but a shadow, and sooner or later this shadow rebels, showing that behind the idol there's a pulsating and untamable body. Nietzsche saw in this an irony. Man who intends to dominate woman, molding her according to his ideal, ends up being dominated by the vitality he cannot control. Marriage, for example, so often exalted as sacred institution, was for Nietzsche a hidden battlefield. The husband imagines he possesses, but frequently is possessed, thinks he commands, but often obeys without realizing. This game springs precisely from the conflict between the masculine ideal of order and the feminine reality of instinct. In daily life, this can be seen in simple situations. Man dreams of the docile woman who understands and follows him, but gets irritated when he perceives that, in practice, he's guided by feminine decisions disguised as subtlety. The contradiction lies at the heart of this relationship. The ideal is desired, but reality is lived. And this reality is stronger than any romantic image. Nietzsche didn't condemn this conflict. On the contrary, he saw in it an expression of life itself. Existence, for him, is never perfect harmony, but creative tension. The clash between the eternal feminine and the masculine ideal isn't tragedy to be avoided, but force to be recognized. It's from this shock that the intensity of love, of passion, of creation is born. Deep down, the lesson is clear. Those who seek in love only the security of an ideal will never endure the force of feminine reality. But those who accept woman as she is, instinct, mask, vitality, find in her not salvation, but a fascinating abyss, before which one can only have courage. Throughout his work, Nietzsche never hid that he saw life as struggle, as expansion of forces, as will to power. Nothing exists that's neutral or harmless. Even the most simple gesture is expression of a force that desires to affirm itself. It's in this horizon that the feminine appears in its deepest dimension, not as fragility to be protected, nor as angelic purity, but as vital force that creates, destroys, seduces, and reorganizes existence. To say that woman is will to power doesn't mean reducing her to manipulation or calculation. On the contrary, it means recognizing that her essence is linked to life's very dynamics, which always reinvents itself and imposes itself. The feminine, for Nietzsche, isn't passivity, but energy in movement. Behind the delicate mask, there's a nucleus of intensity that escapes control, and precisely because of this, fascinates and frightens. Man often seeks to stabilize life. He creates institutions, laws, moral systems, all in the name of order. Woman, however, represents the opposite of this fixity. Her connection with the body, with instinct, with natural cunning, places her in direct contact with existence's raw vitality. She doesn't need to justify each gesture with abstract principles. She acts, feels, moves. This instinctive spontaneity, which so often was called irrationality, for Nietzsche isn't weakness, but authentic expression of will to power. In love, this reveals itself clearly. When woman loves, she doesn't do so only out of sweetness. She loves with intensity, but also with desire for possession, with will to transform the other into part of herself. This isn't angelic love, but love that demands, that marks, that desires to leave scars. Man, accustomed to imagining himself conqueror, discovers often too late that he was the one who was conquered. This role reversal isn't exception, but invisible rule. Feminine love is will to power disguised as care. We can see this in everyday relationships. Man believes he sustains his home, that he guarantees structure, that he's the central pillar of the family. However, looking closer, one perceives that fundamental decisions about children, about life's directions, about transmitted values pass through woman's gaze. Her influence isn't declared in speeches, but exercised in silence, in repetition, in small gestures that little by little shape destinies. This vital force doesn't need titles or formal recognition, because it already acts subterraneously and effectively. Nietzsche saw in this a a form of wisdom. While man clings to the illusion of control, woman knows that true power rarely presents itself explicitly. It hides, disguises itself, infiltrates. The feminine, therefore, would be not only a vital force, but also a more refined life strategy. The art of winning without declaring war, of dominating without appearing aggressive, of conquering without ever ceasing to be mystery. This vision, of course, disturbs. Many interpreted Nietzsche's words as misogyny, but actually what he does is remove woman from the romantic pedestal and return her to the terrain of real life, with all its ambiguity and potency. What offends isn't contempt, but recognition that woman doesn't fit in the fragile idealizations that man creates to protect himself. She's greater, more dangerous, closer to existence's tragic. The connection between the feminine and will to power also appears in motherhood. Generating and educating a child isn't just act of love, but also dominion over the future. Woman, in creating, imprints her mark on the other, prolongs her influence beyond herself. In this gesture lies the highest example of will to power, the capacity to create not just lives, but values, ways of being, forms of seeing the world. While man gets lost in theories, woman acts upon the living flesh of the future. Nietzsche, who so criticized Christian morality's decadence, saw in this feminine vital force a reminder of what it really means to affirm life. The morality of the herd tries to weaken instincts, reduce desire, domesticate forces. Woman, even subjected to centuries of repression, maintained herself in contact with this instinctive dimension. Her will to power wasn't eliminated, only adapted, transformed into subtle game, into invisible strategy, into refined theater. That's why the feminine for Nietzsche isn't just mystery or threat, but also possibility. Woman embodies life in its Dionysic face, that which doesn't fear chaos, that knows how to dance with danger, that creates masks to endure tragedy without ever ceasing to smile. To love her is to approach this untamable vitality and at the same time risk being devoured by it. In the end, woman represents a reminder of what modern man forgot, that to live is to struggle, risk, deceive, create, destroy. That life isn't made for security, but for intensity. Feminine vital force is, therefore, metaphor for existence itself. One cannot possess it entirely. One cannot reduce it to a concept. One cannot domesticate it without killing it. Nietzsche provokes us, then, to an uncomfortable question. By trying to reduce woman to a pure and docile ideal, wouldn't we actually be denying life? And if, on the contrary, we accepted the feminine as will to power, wouldn't we find in it a lesson for our own existence to live without fear of the mask, without refusing instinct, without seeking refuge in the herd's fragile morality? Woman, in this sense, isn't just companion or object of the masculine gaze. She's mirror, she's abyss, she's teacher. And perhaps the deepest secret of Nietzsche's philosophy lies in recognizing that, when facing the feminine, we're facing life itself. Dangerous, instinctive, mysterious, but always irresistibly alive. We've reached the end of this journey through Nietzsche's vision of feminine nature. And what we found wasn't comfort, but upheaval. The philosopher showed us that woman isn't the fragile and romantic image that was so often constructed by culture, nor is she an inferior being to be despised. The feminine, in his reading, is mystery, is danger, is mask, is theater, is instinct, is vital force and will to power. What disturbs in his words is precisely what most reveals truth. Woman, far from being a passive object of the masculine gaze, embodies life's very logic. She resists moral domestication, creates invisible games of power, performs roles that disarm the other, preserves a vitality that cannot be reduced to laws or concepts. Accepting this requires courage. for it means renouncing fragile idealizations and facing existence's abyss. Nietzsche invites us to abandon naivety and see love, desire, and human coexistence as fields of forces. And perhaps the great lesson is this: there's no life without risk, no love without game, no woman without mask. Feminine nature, in its essence, is vitality that challenges, fascinates, and transforms. And now I leave you with a powerful question. What was the idealization about woman that most imprisoned you until today? And would you have the courage to abandon it to face life in its rawest and truest face? If this theme resonated with you, write in the comments where you're watching from. Share your vision about this provocation and participate in this community that seeks to go beyond appearances. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. I deeply thank you for being here. This space isn't just for philosophical reflection, but for encountering what's most intense and transformative in us. We continue together on this journey of thought, courage, and discovery. And